everyone. Welcome to the day 2 of IKMC 2022. Yesterday, I hope you had good discussions and enjoyed the sessions that were collated on day 1. So now I would like to invite our chairman and CEO, Dipanvita Chattopadhyay, to give us a recap of day 1. Madam.
Thanks, Priyankana. As people start walking in, I think it's time. We're already running 15 minutes late, so it's time to start. You know, yesterday, for all those who were not here yesterday, this is just a very quick recap of what happened. You have seen the program. There were 8 sessions, and if you look at like the opening session was an inaugural where we had 2 keynote speakers. Dr. Mashelkar delivered a fantastic talk on what can be done next, what are the grand challenges, and that was the inaugural address. This was followed by 8 sessions, and this is just to give a recap of what all happened. These are pictures to tell you how the day went. There is no time to go through the program in terms of what all happened, and just to tell you in brief that all the sessions that we had, all the 8 sessions that we had 3 major takeaways, at least for the IKP team. One is we have friends across academia, startups, and the industry. Of course, the government, both the state government and the central government. That is a bond that we always had, but this is after COVID, this is our first large conference, and it reiterated the resolve to collaborate and work together. So that was the first takeaway. The second takeaway we had is we now have several pointers to plan strategic actions with small groups within the people who are present. So this is the beginning of a strategic plan for the next 2 to 3 years to say that what all we will be doing. And the pointers, the cues came from yesterday's deliberations. And I'm looking forward to today's deliberations to have the same kind of pointers to see what kind of strategic planning we can do to make India future ready. So that is the theme of the conference, and that's what we plan to do. I told we had 3 major takeaways: the collaboration, the strategic action plan pointers, and the third is, once we have started doing this, we need to ask ourselves, is this what India needs? We have to critique ourselves and say, is the incubation the way we are doing? Is that the right method? The way government is giving out, planning their schemes, is there anything else that can be done? It is about the ecosystem. One is the strategic action plan for IKP. The third is action plan for the ecosystem. And when I say the ecosystem, it is about the policymakers, the other enablers in the ecosystem, and also scientists and entrepreneurs and startups. So what would they be doing? It's just not our strategic plan. It could be a plan for the government and recommendations for other agencies to enable a future-ready India. So thank you so much. It was great. Now I invite our keynote speaker of the day, Dr. Surinder Singh. So can we have... Thank you. Yeah. most of you must have heard about Dr. Surinder Singh. I'm not going to read out his very elaborate CV, but what is very important is being the regulator, being the DCGI, ex-DCGI, what I have seen in Dr. Surinder Singh is his willingness to work with industry and startups in a manner that is extremely helpful for all the stakeholders. We deal largely with life sciences, sir, and in this sector, regulation is the key thing. And we felt that before we have our session on digital health, we need your inputs on the regulatory side, and we invite you, please. Do you have a presentation?
I've got a presentation.
So,
This is the forward one. Good morning to all of you. At the outset, I would like to express my profound gratitude to Madam Deepantita Chattopadhyay ji for very graciously and kindly think of me and to invite me to the forum. And I would also like to express my gratitude to Dr. Priyankana Mukherjee also, who had been constantly in touch with me. And I'm very elated and very happy to be amongst all of you who are from the industry, from the startups, from the academia. It's a pleasure and honor to be a part of this annual innovation conference. I would like to share my perspective from the regulator point of view. Because before I go to my presentation, what I observed during my tenure as a DCGI somewhere way back in 2008 to 11, when we were at the cusp of a lot of regulatory changes and the regulatory landscape in the country was changing very rapidly, and there were a lot of issues with regard to the clinical trials, how they are conducted in our country. And during that time, this is last 1 decade or so, clinical trials, initially they went for there a spike, then it turned downwards because of the lot of issues being raised by the NGOs or so. So that also I'll be covering. But one issue which I always found with the startups, with the industry also was that a lot of their time, investment, which goes into the production of or coming out with the concept of a molecule when it comes to the regulator, what happens is there is not a clarity in understanding of the regulatory issues and norms by the industry. Even by the professionals who are enrolled by them and they come and interact with the drug controller's office, the clarity is not there because of the two things happen. The lot of money which has been invested, that goes waste. Secondly, time gets wasted on this. And time is money. So it's very, very important that the besides this startups, they also understand the regulatory nuances. And for this, I have always been saying from all forums that there needs to be a collaboration between the industry and academia, and also a collaboration between the regulators also, that I will touch upon once I conclude my presentation. So briefly, I will tell you and share with you the experiences which we have been now seeing during especially the COVID pandemic, how our regulatory systems has geared up to basically adopt the emerging technologies. These technologies could be on the life sciences, these could be on the medical devices side, or even for the new drugs. Now, what we are basically seeing is that government is now again and again emphasizing on one component across the board, that is translation research. That countries should do translation research, we should come out with the innovation of new medical products which can be made used for addressing the various public health problems. And this all has happened over the last 4 or 5 years and spurred by the COVID pandemic. And what we have seen is that during this COVID pandemic itself, we have seen that India becoming an innovation hub also. Startups have played a very important role in it. And one area which we see where the startups are coming in a big way is a healthcare and a life sciences sector, which is very, very heartening. And these are the areas where the revolution is actually happening in the translation research. This is happening at the molecular level, genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, bioinformatics system, and imaging technologies. And these have all led, can I have the pointer in this? Center over? This one. Okay, fine. Now, these have resulted in a better understanding of the disease, spurred by the translational search and the newer medical products which are coming out of these activities because of the use of the various proteomics, metabolics, and genomics which are there. They are putting up a regulatory challenge for the regulatory system in the country. Now, these emerging technologies, which are, I've just enumerated, whether it is on the life sciences or in the digital technology side, they are basically affecting the new drug discovery, whether it is novel vaccines and drugs, or it is novel drug delivery system, or newer products like monoclonal antibodies, stem cell-derived products, or it is gene therapeutic products. On devices itself, whether it is the new technologies which are there like Internet of Things, or it is artificial intelligence, augmented reality, all these are coming into the area of medical devices and they are posing regulatory challenges, whether it is, and especially with regard to point of care diagnostics and in vitro diagnostics, which we have seen during the COVID pandemic. Now, how the regulatory system is basically gearing it up, that I will share with you. Now, it's either it is a new drug or it is a medical device. Ultimately, before it gets into the market, it has to go through this process, that is a regulatory process. And there has to be a clear understanding by the technocrats and by the industry entrepreneurs about the regulatory approvals which are required. More or less, the systems are like the ones which have been existing for a long time, but one area where the major change has happened is how the clinical trials are going to be done in our country for the drugs and clinical investigation for the medical devices. Now, in this regulatory landscape, what has happened is that government has tried to see to it that these are the three areas if we have to focus upon, if we have to see that development and approval of the new drugs and vaccine takes up in our country in a big way. One is to talk about a robust ecosystem, which Dr. Deepantiwa also basically just mentioned. Clear understanding of the regulatory pathways, that how to generate non-clinical and clinical data of safety. And this also how we intend to do it. We have got a collaboration now, MOU with IKP, so we can work very closely to help the startups, especially with both non-clinical and clinical data, so that when it is generated, it is basically goes through with the regulators without much of a problem. And these can face the scrutiny of submission and review application process and the clinical trials by the regulators. Now, the Government of India and the CDSU also, since I've been interacting with them, so what I find is that they're also seized of this opportunity which has come up, and they feel that if innovation of drugs has to happen in our country in a big way, then what we require is that series of regulatory measures need to be done, both from the scientific and ethical side. This component is more now emphasized on the clinical trials because this is the one which are basically bring a lot of setback to the clinical trials in the country. And as far as the new drug approval process is concerned, now we've got a very strong systems in place in the form of new drugs and clinical trial rules 2019, which have been put in place by the government. Now, these rules have been notified in 2019, and these rules apply across the board to new drugs, investigational new drugs for human use, clinical trials, BA, BE studies, and a regulation of ethics committee relating to clinical trials and BA/B study. And also, first time, biomedical health research has also been put into these regulations which have been put in place. Further, in clinical trials, drugs and rules which are there in 2019, the drug definition itself has been modified to have new novel drug delivery systems, live modified organisms, monoclonal antibody, stem cell derived products, gene therapeutic products, and xenografts, which were not earlier included in the definition of the new drugs in our country. And these are other salient features which are there in the new drug approval process. These all are the components, whether it's ethics committee, biomedical research has come in it for the first time. Then academic clinical trial has also been elaborated very nicely in the new drug rules. And all ambiguity which was there has basically been done away with it. And also, as we were just discussing on the sidelines of today's deliberations, waiver of local clinical trial and accelerated approvals, they have also become a norm. These are all used during the COVID pandemic to give approvals for the drugs at the various levels. Now, these rules also contain a provision for basically encouraging research and development of new drugs, especially the vaccines, which we have already seen Covaxin coming in the market within the shortest possible time. Otherwise, vaccine usually take 5 to 7 years to develop. But here we had a vaccine just within 1.5 years' time because of the accelerated regulatory process. And major components of the clinical trial regulation I'll touch upon, though the other systems, they were already in place. The first and the foremost thing is, which has been done is that there have been now timelines laid down for giving approvals. For all these new drugs which are coming into the country for the first time and coming for the clinical trials, the approval has to be given within 90 days. But if a product is indigenously developed, this is both for imported and those which are developed in the country, but if an indigenously new drug is developed and or a vaccine is developed, the timeline has kept at 30 days. This is mainly for the imported drugs, and this is for the indigenously developed drugs that and a vaccine. The approval has to be given by the DCGI for within 30 days, and if no communication is released from CDSCO, this application is deemed to have been approved. So this is one of the major change which has come in the regulator side, and this has put the entire system in pressure and gears up the system so that we have the regulatory approvals in time. So this is one of the major change which has come. Now the other change which we are seeing, which is there in our rules which has come is, I'm just touching upon the major features which have got like a long-term implications, the way the drugs are or vaccines are approved in our country, and their approval is fast-tracked. And God forbid if we got a situation like pandemic coming again, this type of a system is there in place. And also it is being used for other, giving regulatory approvals for other challenges also which we face in our health sector, which I'll touch upon. Now there is this second schedule of this drug and cosmetics, drug rules which are there. Now this second schedule, it basically specifies the mechanism to expedite the development and approval. And this is one area which is of interest to us. And here, this is basically the fast-track approval is for life-threatening or serious diseases or the rare diseases, and is also to be used for giving approval for disease of special relevance to Indian scenario and unmet medical needs in our country, also for disaster, pandemic, and special defense uses. So in this, the second schedule of the rules, they specify how accelerated approval process can be done. Now the unmet medical needs have also been defined very clearly in these rules, and these have been explained that these are situations where diagnosis of disease or condition is not addressed adequately by available therapy. So this is very elaborately defined what will actually we mean by an unmet medical need and what we mean by orphan drug. Our definition is different from the definition in US or European Union, and for our country's use, orphan drug has been defined in the said rules, which means a drug intended to treat a condition which affects not more than 5 lakh persons in India. Now these are the provisions which have resulted in accelerated approval process being in place. And here, the accelerated approval process, the major thing which we find is that a marketing approval can be granted when even the phase 2 clinical trial data has been submitted, which is which is a sea change, which was from the earlier norms that approval used to be given only after phase 3 clinical trial had been done. But here, with the surrogate endpoint, if it is found to be satisfactory and efficacy can be demonstrated, then even on the basis of phase 2 clinical trial data, like we have seen in Covaxin, the approval is granted. But in phase 4 clinical trial, additional studies have to be done as a part of post-marketing scenario, so as to basically come out with the data that substantiate that these effects which we are seeing, they are actually resulting in a clinical benefit. Now this provision is intended to facilitate and expedite review of the drugs so that approved product can reach the therapeutic armamentarium expeditiously. And this we have seen in the Covaxin also, in the repurposing of the drugs which have been seen during the COVID pandemic, and also providing approval to the molecules which have been developed at a very short period in our country. Another provision which is of importance to the industry is that now with the payment of a fees, the industry can seek a pre-submission and post-submission meetings with the regulator to have the regulatory guidance and pathways. Like now, today morning, I was interacting with some of the startups. They got a lot of apprehension in their mind that how they should go about developing their molecule. Now, these types of queries which come in the mind of uh, the startups, these can also be discussed before they have the pre-submission meetings with the regulator, and after they have submitted the product, they can also have clarity with regard to post-submission. Now, these are the changes, whether it's accelerated approval, pre-submission, post-submission, the timelines which are there, they are the changes which have happened during the COVID pandemic, and they are going to be staying for a long time. And fortunately, the government had a foresight that they had all these incorporated into regulations which were notified in 2019. And they have been like in deliberation for almost a period of almost 7-8 years before they got consolidated. Now, this is the picture which sums up everything, where a molecule would come into the market within a period of this pathway which we are seeing, regular drug approval process. For a generic drug, this period is usually anywhere, because we do reverse engineering of the drugs in our country, so the approval process can be anywhere between 36 to 48 months for any generic drug over here. But for a new drug to be coming into the market, it takes about 5 to 7 years and even longer period before it gets into the market because of the very elaborate clinical trial it has to go through. But in accelerated approval process, the market authorization, you see if the clinical period, trial period is shortened over here, and here the post-marketing surveillance phase 4 is shorter over here, but here clinical trial is shortened, and phase 2 approval, once it is completed and there is a surrogate endpoint which shows satisfactory results, which we feel that it can result in clinical benefits to the subjects, then the approval is given and marketing authorization is done. But what happens is post-marketing surveillance phase 4 becomes mandatory, and the data generated over here can either result the product being in the market or it could be withdrawn also. But here what is happening is the approval process from 5 to 7 years, it's shortened to almost 1.5 years. And this is a story which we're all very familiar with regard to COVID pandemic, various approvals which were given during this time. Now coming to the medical devices also, here also I'll touch upon the major changes which the government has brought in to basically see that the technological breakthroughs which are happening in our country, they can all be accommodated into the new rules and regulations which are going to be being in vogue in our country. Now, government has notified the medical devices regulation rules of 2017 on 31st of January 2017, and here the first time in our country, we have got a comprehensive regulatory provisions for import, manufacture, sale and distribution of medical devices based on risk-based criteria. And these said rules became effective from 1st January 2018. And they apply whether it's for import, manufacture or clinical investigation, all the areas it is covering. And these are the various chapters. There are about 12 chapters in this, and some of these chapters are omitted, which I'll touch upon, which are the chapters which are omitted and at what level, like suppose chapter 4, 5, and chapter 7, 9, 8, and 11, 9. They are omitted in some of the regulatory provisions which have been notified by the government recently, which I'll cover in the subsequent slides. Now, this medical devices rules, they are in line with the international regulatory practices, and basically government wants that with the help of these new legislation, the rules which are there, Make in India also gets an impetus, and all the technological breakthroughs and innovations, they are basically accommodated in these rules over there. And in this, as I said, it's a risk-based classification. We've got 4 classes of the medical devices. The one class A, B, C, and D. A is of low risk, low to moderate is class B, moderate and high is class C, and high is class D. And what are these medical devices? Just for an example, the low-risk medical devices, these are absorbent cotton wool, surgical dressing, and alcohol swabs. Class B is low and moderate risk thermometer, BP monitoring device, and disinfectants. Class C is moderate high risk implants, hemodialysis catheter. And Class D is high risk angiographic guide wire and heart valves. So these are some of the examples which are there with regard to the various risk-based medical devices in our country. And how these are going to be regulated in our country is that import of all classes of medical devices which are there in our country, the class C and D medical device and the manufacture of all imports and manufacture of class C and D would be by CDSCO. So whether it is A, B, C, D, it will be CDSCO, and C and D medical devices manufacture will be by our central regulator. Manufacture of class A and B medical devices is to be regulated by the state licensing authority. And if there is sale and distribution of any medical device, whether it is imported into the country or it is A to D, all will be regulated by the state licensing authorities. Now, this is what it sums up for all the medical devices based on the risk-based classification. Now, all imports from A to D, they are under Central Licensing Approving Authority, that is DCGI. The manufacture of class A and B is under State Licensing Authority, C and D is under the Central Licensing Authority. Permission to conduct clinical investigation is only by the Central Licensing Approving Authority. Sale is by State Licensing Approving Authority across the board from A to D. Then quality management system verification is by notified bodies for class A and B. This I will touch upon subsequently. And for C and D, it remains with the Central Licensing Approving Authority. Now, there are also, it has also been laid down in these rules that what standards these medical devices they will comply with. Now, these medical devices, they are to basically comply with the standards of either BIS, that is Bureau of Indian Standards, Indian Pharmacopoeia, or those standards which are notified by the central government from time to time. And if these standards are not available, then the standards which are to be followed are those of International Organization for Standardization, that is ISO, or IEC standards, International Electrotechnical Commission standards, or other pharmacopoeial standards. And if these two are also not there, then it should conform to the validated manufacturer standards. So this has also been very clearly laid down that what should be the standards, and this will be of help to the manufacturers also, that how they should be complying with these rules and regulations. Then for import of or manufacture of any medical device, the applicant is required to submit all these documentation, whether it is the design, specification, non-clinical and clinical data with regard to safety and performance, including the regulatory status in other countries, to the CDSCO or the state licensing authority if it is required for import or manufacture. Import will be with the CDSCO, manufacturing would be with the, for A and B with state licensing authority, and C and D for CDSCO. And in case of any medical device, safety, efficacy and performance is to be evaluated by CDSCO in consultation with the subject expert committee. Now this is again a one provision which has come out over here. Prior to 2011, all approvals used to be given by DCGI and his officers as such. But in 2011, for the first time, it was decided that we should have subject expert committees. And in 2011, March, 12 subject expert committees, they were constituted for various products. Now the number has gone more than 50 because the product's complexity is so huge. And for medical devices also, it is not only DCGI who is going to evaluate, it's the subject expert committee, their views, because these people are drawn from the domain specialization in which the product is going to fall over there. Then the other provisions for these regulatory provisions for the medical devices which are there are that these devices, once their approval is given, they are to be closely monitored for their clinical safety, and the whosoever gives the application and markets these products has to submit the periodic safety update reports to CDSCO. And this is both for periodic safety update reports are both for the medical devices, and this is same practice going to be followed in the drugs also. And at present, we have in vitro diagnostics, all are under regulation, and there are 37 categories of medical devices which are notified under Drug and Cosmetics Act and rules, which are under regulation. But now this is going to change because now the phase-wise regulation is going to come in our country. Before coming to that, also once the market authorization for the product has been given, but if there are any safety concern, and we have been listening to them also, if there are any safety concerns, then these products, they are to be withdrawn from the market by the manufacturer or the authorized agent, and they have to inform CDSCO and other competent authorities. And this responsibility is basically for the manufacturer and authorized agent to remove the product from the market as such. So all this has been very clearly laid down in the regulations. Now next is this is also a new concept which has come in our country, that is accreditation by notified bodies, and this is for A and B category of medical devices. And present we got 11 notified bodies which are registered with CDSCO. And for class A medical devices, the audit by the notified bodies is required to be done within 120 days from the grant of license by the SLA. And for class B medical device, the audit is required to be carried out prior to the grant of the manufacturing license. Now, one thing which we observe in this presentation is that our regulatory system is now talking of a defined timeline, that there is a responsibility of the system that it has to respond to the manufacturers or the stakeholders' need within a very, very specified times. And I think industry is making use of it also now. Now, this is the phase-wise regulation of the medical devices which is going to kick off in our country, and the dates have been laid down by the government and specified also. Now, the timeline for A and B medical devices, it has started in October. These have come under regulation from 1st of January from 2022, 1st of October 2022, and this is after almost 30 months of their notification in 1st of April 2020. Because whenever new rules and regulations are coming, industry has to be given time by the regulator so that they can bring about the changes at their end also, and then can adapt to the changes. Now, after 30 months of period, these A and B, they have come under the ambit of the regulatory system. Now, class D, C and D medical devices, from 1st of April 2020, 42 months period time has been given, 18 months for voluntary registration and 24 months for mandatory registration from 1st of April 2020. And now they will all come under licensing process from 1st October 2023. That is from next year, C and D will also come under regulation. So this is how the government is gearing up to regulate the medical devices in our country. And there have been recent 2 notifications by the government, that is General Statutory Rules, that is GSR. One is on 14th of October 2022, that is this month itself, and where it is specified that all class A, whether it is measurable medical devices, are under licensing regime, but non-sterile, non-measuring class A medical devices, as I was mentioning the various chapters, chapter 4, 5, 7, 8 and 9, they are exempted from these non-sterile and non-measuring, they are exempted from these regulations. And these regulations are basically with regard to import, manufacture, for clinical investigation. These are the various rules and regulations. Only thing what we find is that between 7 and between 4, 5, there is a 6 is missing, because this is with regard to labeling. So that means the labeling has to be there on these devices. So these are the regulatory systems which will not apply to the non-sterile. Then as per another notification which has been issued in September this year itself is with regard to that new form has been introduced for the sale of medical devices instead of the earlier form of 20B and 21B, which was there in drug and cosmetic rules. So this has also got changed, that what all provisions have to be satisfied, and this is and all these new provisions, they will be keeping on coming for strengthening the regulatory system in our country, so that the quality of the product getting to the market is safe. Now, there is also a provision like for clinical trials for drugs. There is a provision for clinical investigation of medical devices, and for any new medical device which is developed in our country, clinical investigation is required to be carried out right from the pilot clinical investigation or first in human study, and data generated has to be submitted to the CDSCO. For IND medical device or investigational medical device developed and studied in a country other than in India, so if it is we are bringing into our country, pilot clinical investigation or relevant clinical study data has to be submitted along with the application. Now these are the provisions which has to be clearly understood by the importer or by the manufacturer. Then clinical investigation on an investigational medical device shall be initiated only after approval has been obtained from ethics committee and permission has been granted by the central licensing approving authority. Then clinical trial data has to be submitted by the importer and manufacturer and is to be reviewed by CDSCO in consultation with the subject expert. So these provisions have to be kept in mind while we are basically seeking the approval from the regulator in the country. And to facilitate it, CDSO has got now a Sugam portal where all these documents, they can be submitted online, whether it is for, and applications for the grant can be also be given by for manufacturing license, load license, test license, post-approval changes, and whether it's a clinical trials. All this can be done online with the CDSO now. And the regulatory system, as I mentioned, whether it is about new drugs or it is with regard to the medical devices, now the government basically has realized that if the startup entrepreneurs in our country, they have to be benefited, public health laboratories and even the institutions in the private sector, they have to come up in the country in a big way along with the pharmaceutical and medical devices industry. These regulatory changes which I have talked about, they have to be dynamic, and they alone will ensure that we get affordable and quality healthcare products to our population. But in all this, one thing which is again and again being emphasized by the government is that innovation is fine. But in our country, which is a developing country, we should emphasize frugal innovation so that it is affordable and it can reach the population of the country as such. And with this, I come to the end of my presentation. And what I would like to offer from this platform is that at any point of a time, any of the entrepreneurs or the industry representatives who are over here, they feel we can be of help. Along with the IKP, we are there to offer our services. And I was discussing with Dr. Visu also that he can jot down the issues which are basically are there on the mind of the startups, entrepreneurs who are working on biosimilars, and we can join hand with IKP and see to it that we create some sort of a regulatory forum where we can address their issues in a very precise manner, because each entrepreneur and startup has got issues which are very specific to them. So for this, I think a hand-holding needs to be done, and we can put systems in place where we can have the regulators and the biosimilars and the medical device entrepreneurs working together to have a clarity about the regulation, the system, and what is going to be coming. Thank you very much.
I just want to see, I know we are running short of time, but this is such an important area. If we'll take 2 questions, and so, yeah, can we circulate the mic, please? I can see your hand going up, that's Dhananjay.
My question, you mentioned that there are some timeline provisions for new drug applications. A CRO outside India or a international company, foreign company outsourcing work to a company in India. So how do you decide whether the product is indigenously developed or not? What are the criteria?
Yes, whether the product is indigenously developed depends upon where the substantial the work has been done. Now you see, even like if you see example of Covaxin also. Covaxin, part of the work was done outside US. It was done outside our country in US. But the major part of the development of the vaccine was done in our country. So it becomes indigenous. So basically, what is the component? Because this is a very dynamic sort of a thing. Somewhere there may be areas where 90% of the product is developed outside our country and only 10% of work is done over. That will not be falling into the indigenously. But if the substantial quantum of work is being done in our country, where the manufacturer in our country itself has taken the lead and is the one in the forefront of it, so that will decide upon whether this is because this will depend upon case-to-case basis. The call has to be taken. The thumb rule would be where the major work is being done.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So just a quick follow-up. Is the ownership of the IP the critical factor, or where the physical location of the work the critical factor?
You see, the first is the ownership. That is the most important thing. Sorry. And second thing is the IKP also will the knowledge creation where it is actually happening. That will also matter. So first and the foremost thing is the ownership. Ownership has to be within our country. Secondly, substantial work should be done in our country. So, and because see now, whether it's the biosimilars or even the new drugs also which are coming up, the molecules sometimes they have to go abroad, especially with regard to phase 1 clinical trial. Because phase one clinical trial scenario in our country is still not very healthy. It is still to go a long way. But if phase two, another part of the trial is done in our country, then it will be becoming indigenous slowly.
Thank you.
Is there any other question?
There's one more question.
And this is what, like, you had a very specific question. That's why we want to work with Madam's AKP, so that IKP, so that we can have some sort of a regulators forum itself, where all these queries, they get addressed, not in an isolated manner. It's a continuous, ongoing process, and we interact, so that what happens, the startups, the entrepreneurs, they all have got a lot of clarity about the regulatory issues, and the time and resources is well utilized.
So this is about the SCC.
If you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm SVN Raju. I'm the founder director of Aparamita Innovations Private Limited. We are working on repurposing of patented drugs. So the introduction of SCC into the DCGI system or the CDSCO system is an excellent aspect. But are there any plans to have that ecosystem built into the DCGI itself? Because today it's mostly the experts have been called in for these sessions, and it's a kind of part-time or add-on job. So because of that, one, probably they're full-time to assess the documents, and second is their understanding to the regulatory nuances, like whatever provisions actually the DCGI is giving or the regulations are giving, they are not aware. Suppose there is a provision that clinical phase 1, 2 can be waived off. But as an expert, when I'm in the medical practice, what I see is any drug comes in, it has to follow 1, 2, 3. And it's not followed, hence why this application is coming into the phase 3 kind of a discussion. That's one. And second is, when we are saying that there is a scientific advisory provision given, because the DCGI is not having this full-time SCC members, when in the practical scenario, when we are trying to approach the DCGI for any scientific advisory discussion, the informal feedback comes is you put up your application, then we will process. That's where actually we are losing time, as well as when we apply and then we come to know that certain studies are not done, and then the agency or the SCC is asking this. We are losing a lot of time and money.
You see, your questions are well taken, because what happens in DCJ office also, despite these online portals and all the systems in place, the volume of work, you see, I've been at DCJ, so even during those time, 22,000 approvals would be given, which will be unheard. The number of clinical trials which have happened in our country, and the number of molecules, the number of manufacturers. So one is the overwhelming, the workload which is there, the consciousness of the manpower also along with that. That's a one part, but that's not an excuse. What I would suggest is that all these issues which the industries, because what is happening, these are basically pertaining at your level. It never gets to the opinion makers and the policy makers at the higher level. So these are the types of platforms where all these need to be consolidated, and these arguments have to be leveraged at a higher level so that the system also aligns. And these types of issues, they are there. I agree with you, but these can be sorted out. But these have to be brought to the notice of the opinion makers and the policy makers, who would basically then strengthen the system and see to it that these types of issues where the delays are happening, where the process are coming in the in the way of the entrepreneurs getting all the approvals on time, or not having the clarity with regard to understanding, they can be done away with. But this is something doable, but as such, what I feel is the system is still in the process of gearing it up. All this looks very fine on the presentation side, but the key is with regard to the implementation. So who is going to leverage this for the see to it that these are really implemented in letter and spirit? It is for you and me. It is for you and me to see to it that this system actually works according to the timelines and the time frames which we want over there. So this we can leverage to them, and all these issues which you are raising it over here, if we bring it to their notice, the system is responsive, let me tell you. But what happens is somewhere in between, these get lost over there.
So apart from these kind of forums, what are the other ways where we can actually get in touch with the policymakers? Because that's where, unless we, as you rightly said, we will not be able to sound off these kind of issues to the policymakers, then these will be lost in the discussion.
No, you see, as an individual, even if you take it up over there, what happens, there will be isolated issues with each one of the manufacturer entrepreneurs. It needs to be brought to these types of platforms where they are consolidated and then put across to the opinion makers and policy makers, and not only to put across, let me tell you, it has to be followed through so that it actually becomes a reality and it is doable. You see, I have worked in the system. What I have realized is that usually we send the proposals, we don't follow it up. If we follow it up, the system is responsive. And all changes which you are seeing, somewhere they got triggered, somewhere at some point of a time in 2008 or 9 or 10 or 11, today we are seeing these changes are happening over here. These, we have to be optimistic, but what has happened, all these issues, they have to be brought to the notice of the regulators. And since you are brought to our notice, that's what I was saying, that we will create a forum of the regulators, the best people, the best brand ambassadors for you, for all the entrepreneurs, will be the regulators themselves. So we have to engage with them, whether they are in service or outside the service.
Thank you, sir.
So it's just today's meeting is just a beginning of that journey on which we are going to embark upon. Thank you.
So I request Dr. Deepanvita, please.
For that, I think the credit goes to Ma'am only. She has brought us to this work.
So what we'll do is, we'll form a forum and we will let you know, whoever wants to join. It cannot be a very large forum, but we would form a forum, and with the help of Dr. Surinder Singh as the chair, we will constitute a body so that we can actually represent to the government. Thank you so much.
Just add, ma'am, one.
Yes, yes.
See what the system, how the system works. Now, after being a DCGI and being the government director of National Institute of Biologicals, where all these biosimilars go, I have joined as the vice chancellor. The first thing which I realized in academia is students are not industry ready. We just pump in knowledge to the students, they don't have the skills. The first thing what we have done is, in our pharmaceutics department, the regulatory affairs department, the first thing I did was the joint drug controller who superintended from the regulatory system, we have brought him in as a professor over there. It's the first time regulators are becoming vice chancellors, regulators are becoming professors. So what is happening is we are bringing the very people into the system. Now the students are going to get trained in the regulatory issues. We have tied up with Biocon also. And first batch of the students, 40 students who passed out in the certification course, all they got placed within 3 hours of the window opening up. All 40 got placed. So just a small change in the system, see what paradigm shift it becomes. Because what happens now with this type of a thing, students, when they have a knowledge, along with that knowledge come the skills. And they are industry ready. So same way we have to do other way around, that we have to see that we consolidate our issues which we want to basically bring it to the notice of the regulators. So this type of forum will help us. We have to be very optimistic, and I think this is going to be the right type of forum from where we can take it up. Thank you.